Just as a reminder to our listeners, we're talking about domains. We've covered several, and today the domain that we're talking about is planning, the planning domain. I wish we'd have had some of this information back when I was a younger project manager. I remember I was doing an oversight it was a fairly large project, and the client that we were working for had hired an independent validation and verification contractor to do some oversight and help them with understanding the ins and outs of doing good project management. And they gave the IV&V contractor full review power over our schedule. Well, we developed the schedule as part of the initial planning, and the schedule turned out to be about 10,000 lines of tasks, 10,000 lines of tasks. And
Ouch.
the idea was that you had to be fairly as accurate as you could be by quarter. So the first quarter that we would be working on was very detailed tasks. And then as you went out further, it was less detailed. I don't have any idea what the quarter had to do with anything because I've never done projects based on quarters. But regardless, we turned in and we also had to have these approved by the IV&V contractor in order for us to get paid for that particular deliverable. So every quarter we had this planning document that was to be approved and paid for. Well, unfortunately, the IV&V contractor would take the full quarter to approve it. And so by the time it was our time to turn in the next quarter, he hadn't yet approved the first quarter. Well, you can't run a project on that. And here's the point with that story. Planning can get in the way of the technicalities, and we can do planning for perfection and planning's sake and forget about why we are doing the planning, which is to implement the project. So that was one of my little war stories that it would frustrate me beyond anything.
One of my earliest mentors when I was a consultant had a similar message to me, and I think about this all the time. He says the plan is not the thing. You have to be prepared to throw out the plan. The process of planning, the planning is the thing. The activity of going in and collecting data, doing your analysis, and making course adjustments is what's critical to project success. And he would say this to me on a weekly basis. The planning is the thing. The plan is not the thing.
Well, and think about just your daily life. I mean, once in a while, my family will get together and we'll say, okay, here's what we're doing today, or here's what we're doing for the weekend. And somebody comes down with the sniffles, and suddenly you change. You can't go to a certain place that you had intended to because the sniffles got in the way. Well, you have to learn to adjust. But was there anything wrong in developing the plan in the first place? No. Was there anything wrong with sticking to that plan no matter what? Yes. So your mentor was exactly right.
Another influencer said this online the other day, and it caught my eye. It's funny how these things, when you start looking for them, they're all over the place. He said, no plan survives contact with reality.
Well, wasn't that a famous boxer? Oh, I wish I could remember the quote. Was it Mike Tyson, I think, said your plan is intact until you get hit in the nose or something like that. Something like that. So
and this is life.
Yeah.
This is life, and we have to be prepared for it. The mindset is not to create a perfect diamond. The mindset is to move this diamond through life, and things are going to come at it, and you protect it, and things are going to nick it, and you're going to polish it. And this is what planning is all about. It's the activity of navigating and managing.
I remember, we can get on another topic, but I remember very concretely one of the projects I was on, and I was getting some counsel from another person in terms of the plan. And I just looked at him and I said, if I did it your way, we'd be calling it the done, not the plan.
I like that.
I wish we could all see into the future as well. I think we can, but the The plan is to guide us, to get us started, but it doesn't mean we don't do those course corrections along the way.
We talk about becoming a project manager. And for you, it was for me, by the way. This is something that I think back on. And for you, was planning the first management skill that you learned?
I wish I could say that we were enlightened back when I became a project manager as we are today, or as we're trying to be today. And the answer to your question is yes. And I think at some detriment because yes, the plan was important. The plan was one of the first things we learned, but then the plan became the be all and end all. The whole idea of having that schedule on the wall that you could walk into and say you're ahead of schedule, you're behind schedule became so important that we forgot what it really was designed to do, and that was to help you implement the project, not stare at the plan and say how pretty it is. And so, yeah, it was the first thing, but I think we should have been learning the human aspects of project management along with the technical aspects of planning the project.
Back in 1992 through 1995, actually, it was 1991 through 1995. I was it was my first real job job, and I was working as an IT expert, basically right out of my 2-year degree school. And my supervisor, we ran in a somewhat autonomous model, and my supervisor said, "We have too much work. I need you guys to step up within 6 weeks. You're all project managers, right?" And the first thing he did was say, "Okay, you have this project, you have this project, you have this project. We all have to work together and we have to balance these things. And when there's problems, bring me in and we'll sort them out." And so he'd say, "Put together a plan." And he said, "It's not that we're going to follow that plan. I want to make sure that you thinking through what this project is about and all the aspects. I want to see what you're thinking about, and I want to see what you're not thinking about." And it was his intention that whatever the plan looked like, it was an ability for him to oversee how our minds were attacking this problem, not necessarily how the work was going to get done. And I thought over the years, that's a brilliant way to teach planning to people.
Yeah, and it is because you're also bringing in the human aspects, the need for the plan should not become the thing in itself. It is a deliverable, but the deliverable is to deliver a product, and that's yeah, yeah, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah,
I
and it's people bouncing ideas off of each other. It's people making proposals that might get shot down. And oh my, heaven forbid somebody else have a better idea than me.
exactly. But back to your question, I worked for early on. I worked for a company that was very very strong in project management, and they had some of their own before Microsoft Project and all of these tools came in. They had their own homegrown process for both planning, scheduling, and then also tracking against the plan, and it was very strong. From then we graduated to things like the early DOS versions of Microsoft Project. I don't know if you
Right,
remember
right,
those.
right. Oh, I'm very familiar with them.
And then ABT, I think, was called Project Workbench. And now a lot of people seem to graduate to the Windows version of MS Project, which is to me it's a good tool, but we have to remember it's a tool. It's not the thing. It's the tool.
It's funny because I have based well, I've worked with, consulted with, and lectured to the people who maintain the big three project management software suites, Microsoft Project, Primavera, and Sciforma. And they all have the same mindset and they all have the same attitude. Like what you're thinking. It provides a framework for you to have a thoughtful experience in putting together a potentially successful result.
Yeah.
And I'm working right now with the federal government. And one branch of the federal government I'm working with have a really big bent towards this tool for a plan, right? One of my associates who was helping me do the research were wondering why this company was the company that this federal department wanted to go with. I found head of sales, and he said, we're not selling a tool, we're selling a relationship when we actually involve it. And this branch of the government understood the value of that. And that's why they say go with this tool, because everybody focus on tool,
Yeah.
and nobody focuses on, like what you're saying. How do you actually engage and work together to put something reasonably common sense?
And see, and I think the short way of answering that too, what I really was trying to get to was in the early days when I became a project manager and was going through the training, it was the tool. It was like if you could make that tool hum, you were a good project manager. And that just it just didn't make sense to me when I was looking back. And as one of my mentors once said, a fool with a tool is still a
Still
fool.
a fool.
So
Still a fool. I'm gonna take that with me the rest of my life. I like that quote.
yeah, I do too. I wish I could attribute it to the right person. I don't remember which one that was that said it to me, but one of the definitions in the project management body of knowledge, the seventh edition, talked about the fact I've got it right in front of me. It says planning results in an organized, coordinated, and deliberate manner. Do we think that's true also? We've been talking a lot about agile. Do you think that definition where planning results in organized, coordinated, and deliberate manner, do you think that fits with agile as well?
Let me keep from waxing poetic here, okay?
Yes. Yes.
In a predictive or a traditional project framework, you've either done the work before or there's sufficient work history for you to use your data gathering and assessment to provide something that has a high probability of giving you the result you want or better, right? Now,
Correct. Yes.
in Agile, you don't have that. So what do you have? You have, okay, how do people work together in an unknown state? How do I have to engage this team when they're going to be frustrated and confused? And how am I going to have to help the team develop to be self-organizing so they don't let anything stop them? And what are the touch points I need to be working with my team? So this is the beautiful thing. If you look at it from that perspective, the plan is all focused on the technical work in predictive models. Now, again, that's not true. In Agile, you're focused on the relationship models. You don't see, and we can even get into cadence with this and not just schedule. Just we're going to meet every morning, every afternoon, every morning, every afternoon until we have more clarity. And then we'll meet every Monday, every Friday, every Monday, every Friday. See, in predictive projects, you have that cadence built into the work and it's expected for the milestones. But when Agile, you have to create this artificial cadence that's not even connected to any specific type of work, but allows you to do the deep research, work out your experiments, work together with everybody, gather more information, and you're still creating that framework of a plan, that cadence. And that's the beauty of Scrum and Agile. It helps you create an initial plan from which you can build the plan we know much more in predictive or traditional projects.
So that's when you're working on an agile project that really, for want of a better term, you're probably going after something that's sort of got an unknown result.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. My favorite project I'm talking about right now, it could very well conceivably change the whole perspective of what we think about in computing. And my client is having to think not just what are we going to make as a computer processor for this type of technology, but how are we going to create the factories that can actually work with this different level of laws of science to be able to handle making these things, managing these things, testing these things, and changing these things. And you can't get people to wrap their heads around that problem until they start playing with this science and playing with these ideas.
So it's like you get an empty whiteboard and say, okay, let's go.
And that's what Agile is. It's the
Yeah.
whiteboard with that culture and that set of activities that you call Scrum ceremonies and Scrum framework that actually help you turn that whiteboard into an idea.
Yeah, the experience that I've had with Agile, I think it was one of those things where it was an organization that went from predictive, which was very traditional, to an Agile framework, but they always wanted a focused result. They knew the result they were after. They just wanted to use the Agile methodology to get there. But even in that situation, we would use very strong plans to coordinate the activities. And I think where we differed a little bit from your explanation was we allowed for something we called a minimum viable product.
Mhm.
In other words, we knew the end result, we just didn't know all the bells and whistles that would end up in the end result. And we could have things that we could leave behind in order to still make our schedule according to our plan and get the result that we were looking for. So regardless of however we paint this, we need to be planning.
We could, again, talk much more about Agile, and maybe we should in the future. But frankly, Agile gives us the opportunity to say, what if I'm super constrained in my budget and I'm a little flexible in my schedule and my scope? What if I'm super constrained in my scope? Can I play a lot more loosely with my budget and my schedule? And Agile actually can be much more sophisticated than we think it is.
Yeah. Typically people think of Agile as how much result can I get for the budget that's been handed to me, right? That's
I was going to bring this up as a great example of Agile. Marketing. When I was working at marketing with new business products, they'd give me a quarterly budget. There you go, right?
yeah.
You're constrained within 3 months, and you have that money. If you don't use it, it goes away. And so what my job was to do was to outsource to marketing experts that I could pull in under contract and say, when this money runs out, we're done with the project. I'm looking for this type of content. I don't mind whether it's 3 pieces of content or 12 pieces of content. The quality has to be at this level, and I will pay you for that. And those were the fixed components. Otherwise, it's let's see what beautiful music we can make together. And
Yeah.
that's where Agile came in.
That's good. So in my opening gambit, when I talked about the IV&V contractor taking a full 3 months to approve our plan when the next one is due, I think a lot of that after a couple of those cycles, when we finally took it to their project director saying this has to stop, we need to get on this in a different way. But I think what I was witnessing was someone who was looking for perfection
There
rather
you
than
go.
something was usable. So here's a question for you and for me. Do you think it's more important to get the perfect plan, or do you think it's important to apply some sort of appropriate planning technique and then just get going?
This is where I fight convention. A lot of project managers are taught that you need to plan and plan well, and that's all they're taught. They're not taught nuance. I think that we should start teaching nuance. It's getting people to understand that there are more components of the context that drive the decision of how precise you want the plan versus how quickly you want to get the work started. That you need to understand that it depends is therefore an important reason. But I really believe human beings, being the type of creatures we are, love to get things out quickly and get it out enough functionality and enough value.
Yeah, and I think when well, 40 years that I've been on IT projects, solid 40 years IT projects. I have yet to witness a perfect plan.
Yeah, and let's actually understand this whole idea of minimum viable product, the whole idea be, behind minimizing functionality is an intentional activity. It is a plan. It's not something that you just throw out there to shorten the cycle. You're not trying to get more work done in a shorter amount of time. That that breeds defects and failure. What you're doing is creating an environment so that you can set up these very, very, very conscious activities called experiments or reviews or whatever you want to call them, so that you can really understand it takes a little bit of time inside that capsule. But still, having that discourse, having that debate of what do we really need to have right now, that scoping mechanism, I think we've needed that all along.
We have, and I used to frustrate me, especially dealing with, and I apologize to our listeners who may be government employees, but it used to frustrate me that government typically tried to look for perfection and they would pay based on perfection. And sometimes they didn't understand, or a lot of my clients didn't understand when good enough was good enough. And so as a result of that, at some point you have to have something that is good, can't be perfect, to get you started. And in fact, it was, I looked this up a while ago. General George Patton said this: a good plan. Now he's talking about war, so that's project management is not war, but the concept here that he tried to talk about is very, very applicable, I think, to our discussion. He said a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan next week. There's a lot can happen in that intervening time between good enough and perfect. I
Right.
can throw the whole thing off. So we have to be consciously, as project managers, we have to be consciously aware and bring our stakeholders along with us to understand that yes, this is a good plan that we can get started with. It may not be perfect, and I define perfect anyway. No one can define perfect when it comes to planning.
Now, I will insert a caveat here. Okay. Again, you talked about federal government manufacturing,
Oh
is
yeah.
specifically processors, computer processors. See, even within computer processors, the plan for creating and deploying a new computer processor depends. Are you going to use it in a heart monitor? Are you going to use it in a missile guidance system? Or is it going to go in a child's play toy? And over the generations of different types of computer processors, these manufacturing companies have learned we don't have to have this understanding of angstroms, the tiniest measurement unit in the metric system. We don't have to have that understanding in there, but we have to have the understanding of microns. And they each project requires its level of specificity. And the planning may not say we have this level of tolerance or this level of tolerance, but the planning will say something like we're working with a child's play toy computer. We're not working with something that is going to keep somebody alive for the next 40 years.
Yeah, so there is a degree based on the result that you're looking for.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, you're on those projects where you've got a whole team waiting, perhaps, or maybe they got started with pieces of a plan that were in someone's mind were perfection while you worked on the rest of the plan. But people get frustrated when they can't get that marching, moving forward in unison in such a way that you can see the end result coming. And
Boy,
I've been on projects where, quite frankly, even a rudimentary plan got us there because we just knew in our hearts of hearts what we could do with the plan that we had.
I'm starting with a new cycle of research in human behavior. And what you've actually said is critical for us to understand. For people to be motivated, we need confidence. But the problem is, here's the dilemma. Confidence is driven by a result, not by an input.
Yeah.
Now, how do you create confidence at the beginning of this whole thing? You demonstrate cadence and you demonstrate progress. Number one, you create these milestones, whether they're created through the relationships in Agile or through the work itself in predictive. And then you measure, you assess, you communicate that progress up and down the stream. Communication in this area is so critical.
But it's that motor, it's that you said progress, it's that impetus, it's that movement forward. It's today may be the day for crazy puns or crazy quotes, but one of my favorite quotes is you can't steer a parked car.
Yes, yes, yes. That is the essence of what we're talking about. Exactly. You can't steer a parked car.
So if I'm in the car with my family planning a trip across nationwide, across the whole country, that plan doesn't do me any good until I start moving. And
Yeah,
then and then I
and
can't make adjustments until I find out, oh, this part of the road is blocked. We have to do a detour. So there's so many applicable things to say, let's just get a plan out that's good, but let's not worry about perfection.
exactly.
So
And
can I, before we go on to the next question, can I add one more little corny thing here?
yeah,
In the US, for people who don't know Texas, Texas is like an entire country by itself. And you can stay on the freeway, or as my wife and I decided to do, we decided to go off the freeway through some of the smaller back roads. And we had the most incredible time on those back roads visiting different little towns that we would have never seen on the freeway. Now, if my objective was to get across Texas in 10 hours or whatever that was ever possible, I would have stayed on the freeway. But
mhm.
if my objective was to do a little sightseeing along the way, I got off the freeway and did other kinds of observations and other kinds of trips. So if you look at it from that way, it's your objective that decides what the plan looks like, and good enough and perfection and all that come into being. But basically, you need to understand what your objectives are and what your end result is going to be.
Agree totally. Agree totally there.
So one of the things, because all of my work pretty much was contracting for profit. Um, and every project we did was, I was an outside contractor, and this probably pertains to internal IT shops as well. But how do when we do our initial planning on a project, how much time should be focused on that initial planning versus when do we know we can actually get started? Do
I
you have,
get this I get this question all the time, and I hesitate to answer it. The answer is yes.
yeah, that's true.
I hate to say that, but this is a really good question because again, there's also this sense of what we call here in the West analysis paralysis. Yeah,
Yes.
and how much time should we spend in understanding the problem before we start investing in the solution? And I think that's the question my students are really asking. And
How
I
much
don't know.
time? So how much time we should invest? Say that again, the last part. How much time we should invest
In the planning
on the plan versus the solution? Yeah.
versus creating the
Yeah.
solution. Yeah.
And
And that's a really hard question.
it is. And I tell you what, my answer today is a lot different than my answer from 20, 30 years ago when I was less experienced. Some of that does come from experience as to what we can start based on what we've done so far.
Right.
One of the little tricks that I did learn, it's not a trick, it's a technique that I learned early on, though, that has worked well for me in projects that I've managed, is that you look towards the foreseeable future. And let's say in predictive, that's the end of the next major phase. let's say you're doing the analysis phase or the design phase or whatever, you can see that part of the project clearly. And so you put your very detailed plan together for that part of the project and less detailed from that part to the end. Then when you're completing that phase and looking to the next one, you put a detailed plan again in place for that next phase, and that allows even more detail for the phases that follow. So in some ways, that allowed us to concentrate and focus on detailed plans for the next 6 months, 3 months, whatever it is. And then after that, you would end up doing some more detailed planning for that. And that worked well for us because you could always keep the end in mind, but your focus was on what was right in front of you.
That's exactly right. This is what I learned coming out of business school. Finance releases its money at a certain cadence. Executive, the C-suite, they make their critical strategic decisions on a yearly basis. And then, based on that, the marching orders commence from the C-suite to the vice presidents, to the directors, to the managers, to the supervisors, to the workers. And each level says, we have an idea now of what the vision is. Let's work right now. And in a way, this actually models what we call in project management rolling wave planning. So in a lot of these big critical projects, especially when they get into 1 year, 2 year, and 5 year projects inside of a corporation, adopting this rolling wave strategy is not just a success criterion for understanding and managing expectations around budgets for funding and scheduling and resourcing, but also managing expectations of the decision makings of the executives.
And that's important too. A lot of my projects were 4 or 5 or even 6 years long. No person can predict what's going to be there at the end of 6 years. I mean, you have your focus in terms of how you're going to get there, but things happen. CIOs change, CEOs change, project managers change, new rules come in, all sorts of things happen along the way. So not only is it important to get started so that you can move that freight train along even as changes come at you, so that when those changes come at you, you can flex and move along with the changes and keep the end goal in mind. So yeah, it's one of those things where at some point just get started.
Yes, yes, exactly.
So how much
Very
did you
good.
go ahead? Sorry.
Very good. Um, so we're really actually focusing back, even though we're talking about strategies and tools in planning that have always been there all along, like rolling wave planning, it actually is focusing back on the habits and behavior of people, of how people work in groups in business and how people make decisions just in their normal lives. Um, the big question is, again, let's come back to these trends that we're talking about. We're looking at how much detail do we need to put in the plans and what level of accuracy. These two things seem to be going hand in hand when we're determining, is this plan good enough for us to actually get work going to provide a high probability of what we expect to have as an outcome.
Yeah, one of our rules of thumb when I worked for a project management company, and then even when I worked for one of the big four, one of our rules of thumb tended to be that we would keep tasks to about 10 days of duration. So you would split up whatever work you're doing, you would split it up roughly into, it could be 3 days, it could be 12 days, but you try to keep it in that 10-day framework because people could plan what they needed to do in 2 week chunks very, very easily. And interestingly enough, when I was in Agile projects, the first one had 2 week sprints, the second one had 3 week sprints. So even in Agile, they recognize that you can do something in those shorter sprints as long as you're focused on just that piece of the task at that moment in time. So I think there's something to be said for planning, but not being so prescriptive that you don't have time to think about what you're doing.
We're getting into the mindset of Agile again with sprints. And sprints is like, what is it? 10 to 20 working days, right?
Yeah.
2 to 4 weeks. Okay.
Yeah.
I never saw the logic until I was working as a consultant and I had 3 clients and about 5 contracts going on. And I realized I wasn't going to be able to touch each and every contract every day. So how do I juggle this? And so what I did was I created a punch list for myself with my A's, B's, and C's, right? A is today, B is tomorrow, and C is later. And then within those, what are my priorities? And I started realizing I would fill up a piece of paper like this every 2 to 5 days, and every 2 weeks, if I didn't see progress, I would reprioritize. And it seemed like this was not something done as a decision for the type of work I was doing, but the way I approached managing all these diverse types of work within one schedule called Tim.
Interesting. Very, I mean, and that makes a lot of sense from just being able to get out in front of the tasks and prioritizing those as you go along.
Right. And again, it's creating those constant touch points,
Yeah.
like you for 10 working days. For me, as a worker, getting the work revitalized, reprioritized, and a little further down the road every 2 days seemed to create that sense of progress where I wasn't just the person who was happy with the work, but everybody connected with me was constant because it's not that they wanted perfection. They didn't even have a good definition of perfection. What they wanted to do was see progress so that they could tell the people they were reporting to how we're doing.
Yeah, I have seen projects, not very many, but once in a while you'll see a project where you get a project manager that's very, very detailed in their plan. The work by the worker becomes so prescriptive, it takes the creativity out of the task, and you end up with this mundane set of tasks that really end up with a less creative solution for your stakeholders. So I think depending on how well or what level of maturity you have as a team, you also put in detail based on that team, but you never, ever, ever get so prescriptive that you force them to do this box ticking instead of creating.
Wow. When we look at planning, we think planning is so simplistic because it's just getting the work out on a piece of paper, right? And then you start looking at the nuance upon nuance upon nuance and realize that planning is not what we thought it was. Now, here's the thing. Here's the thing. If you were to perhaps influence a project manager today to get quicker to that attitude and mindset, what would you tell them?
To get quicker to so you're saying as much as we want you to be good at using the tools, we want you to be better at the human aspects, let's say. Is that's where you're getting at?
Yeah, but the problem is you can't just say, go be a leader, can
Yeah.
you? We
No,
want you to
you're not.
focus more on leadership than actually building the schedule. Because if you start saying things like that, you're running the risk of somebody not actually documenting enough planning. See, this is a tricky
Yeah,
question,
it
isn't
is.
it?
Yeah. So if I were advising a new project manager, I would first of all I would say get, and we've said this many times, I would say get yourself a mentor and watch and learn. Because if you get a very solid, strong mentor who's done this over and over, you can start to see, and I'll use the word shortcuts, which are a positive thing in the context that I'm using it, as opposed to a negative thing. But there are shortcuts to planning that take into what you were calling a mindset so that you want to get the project going. So watch that mentor and see what that mentor does in order to get the whole team moving and adjusting along the way. So that's the first thing I would do is get yourself a solid mentor.
So you're getting into strategy. Right,
Yeah.
right. Now, there are some strategic things we need to look at and tactical things. Let me do a little counterpoint. While you're doing that, while you're observing the big picture activities of what a project manager does when they're mature, start learning about the tactics like brainstorming versus analysis. Analysis using things like statistics, probability, risk, quality, and don't try to use them all at once.
Right.
Use them as different types of problems or different types of solutions to the varying problems that you're running against. Don't just look at the functionality of the tool. It's like learning all these shortcuts in Excel and not understanding what the formula is really saying.
Yeah.
And that's inviting confusion and chaos, because if you don't understand the concepts behind why the tools are asking you for that data, you need to go back to the whole idea of planning as a component of a general project management framework.
Yeah, when I first started, much like what you're just describing, the project or the company that I worked for at that time would have us go up the ranks to at the point that you became a team leader. Well, when I talked about mentorship, I ended up using the project manager as my mentor and watching that person. But as a team lead, having my own little piece of the project to be responsible for, I had to get involved with the other team leads so that we all acted in unison and coordinated well. And from what you were saying, a lot of that required us to have some of those late night boardroom meetings where we would brainstorm, where we would analyze, where we would see what was possible by coordinating all of our schedules into one major schedule. And you're right, it was more than just using the tool. It was actually coordinating, complying with each other and making sure that we could get to that point where we're
And
all
and and with all these tools, use them in experiments, try them out, work with them, play with them. Who knows? You may find new uses for things like statistics and probability in projects and project management. Get comfortable with these things too. Because again, when I started working with the quality aspects of my project, my supervisor said, okay, Tim, for quality on this project, number one, how are you going to find defects? Number two, how are you going to ensure people are doing work in the right order? And that's all he gave me advice. That's what I thought quality was for the first 2 years of my project life. And of course, that is what it is from a big picture.
yeah. Well, and the whole idea of getting comfortable with brainstorming and I think you said statistics. Statistics play a huge part. The probability of if you do this, this is going to happen, play a huge part in the estimation process towards project delivery. And that was something that I had to learn early. Fortunately, I had taken a lot of statistical courses in my college degree, and so I understood why we would do what we needed to do. But yeah, it was one of those tools that helped me to get ready to be a good project manager.
And statistics are the foundation of what we're talking about today, good planning. Statistics says we may not have 100% chance of the outcome we want. So how are we going to protect the success in that environment? Number one, look for risks, look for deviations from that 100% probability. Number two, understand human nature and the world we live in, because they both introduce not just risk, but this sense that you can predict if you understand these things.
Sounds like, Tim, that would just be easier to learn how to manage a project from the schedule.
That's the thing. And in this world we live in, everything is now, 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 now.
Yeah.
And I get this from my students all the time. I don't have time to do this,
Right.
Tim.
Yeah.
Okay, then the project you're running today is going to be the project you're going to run in 20 years. Are you satisfied with that? If you are, fine. If you want to do something a little different and start reaching for stars, then you're going to have to do a little bit of stretching.
And if you don't want to be named in the lesson learned, which I was just which I was just going to get to, that another
Beautiful pivot. Beautiful.
another another technique I think for a younger project manager is to go over lessons learned. If you've been on a project that had great success, mediocre success, or maybe no success, what were the contributing factors to that? Go back to those lessons learned and study those so that when you get to the next project, you either do the good things better or the poorer things you avoid and get around those. So yeah, lessons learned to me has been an incredible asset to my project management career.
What a finish. That is wonderful. Good call there, Merv. I had almost missed that one, but you're exactly right. It's that constant improvement, not just pushing your team, because as much as you push your team, you cannot expect but to push yourself too.
Yeah, and pushing
Beautiful.
pushing the team, just at some point people just are tired. They don't want to always hear the push push. They want to hear the rewards and the attaboys and the attagirls and the it just at some point we as humans love to work together without the constant harping to get something done, right? I mean, it just comes down to let's, as project managers, set that good mindset for a good result.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, I have enjoyed this conversation this week.
Yeah, we've got a few more domains to discuss, and then we're gonna have to look at our season 3. So that'll be a
Yeah,
lot of
that's
fun.
going to be fun.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you again, Merv. This has
Yeah.
been a wonderful discussion. And again, I'm by this time I'm not too surprised, but I'm highly satisfied with the result of you and me seeing the same thing, even with our separate viewpoints. I think people have gotten that message in
Well,
this
I
season.
yeah, I think so too. And the other thing is I keep going back, and I've said it a couple times even in this particular session, is that me today having the benefit of looking back over 40 years versus me of 20 years ago having less benefit of that. If we had done this same show 20 years ago, we would have had totally different um, viewpoints on these kinds of questions, and I think less mature. I think a lot of what we're doing, you and I, is a much healthier approach to project management where we're looking at it from the more people-oriented aspects of what it is that we need to do to deliver projects and not just depend on schedules on the wall and perfect status reports and all that. So I'm enjoying that aspect of it to be able to take what you and I have learned as mature project managers over the year and be able to impart that to those who are listening.
Indeed, indeed.
Well, and the other thing is, and Tim, this is a little selfish for both you and me. We've talked about putting articles out on LinkedIn and some of the other social media platforms, articles specific to IT. And if people want us to write about something that they're interested in, I would be happy to do that as well because articles is us.
Yes, indeed. I'm looking forward to that aspect of our next season as well. Well,
All right.
thanks again. Looking forward to talking to you. Until later, um, let's have some more fun.
You bet. Until then.